Graph and write interval notation for the inequality -7 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 3. Let's take a look at our answer choices. Let's start with D. For D, we notice that the numbers on the number line that are shaded in are to the left of -3. The bracket indicates that we want to include the -3. So a bracket means to include. So include -3. The solutions continue on indefinitely to the left, and the symbol that we'll use is minus infinity. So minus infinity is not a number, it's just a symbol to indicate that the values of x continue indefinitely to the left. So the interval notation, it kind of mimics the number line notation or the graph notation. We start off with minus infinity to indicate that the values of x decrease without boundary. We then put a comma, and then the number line goes all the way up to the number -3. So we write -3. And then we need to decide whether or not to use a bracket or a parenthesis. We want to include the -3, so we use a bracket, just like we have on the number line. Now, minus infinity, you might be thinking, well, we want to include all the numbers that are decreasing without bound and think that a bracket would be appropriate. But remember, minus infinity is not a number, so we can't technically include it. So when you're working with infinity or minus infinity, always use a parenthesis. This indicates that the numbers will continue indefinitely to the left. So the interval notation is the interval from minus infinity to -3, including -3. How do we write this as an inequality? Well, all the numbers in this interval are less than or equal to -3, so we would simply write x is less than or equal to -3. All right, let's move up to C. What would be the interval notation? Well, as we move along the number line from left to right, the first number that we encounter on the graph is -7. However, this time instead of a bracket we see a open parenthesis. That means that we want to exclude -7. -7 is not included. However, the numbers right up to -7 are included. So -6.9, -6.99, and so on. All those numbers are included, but not -7. The numbers continue indefinitely to the right, and so we'll use the symbol infinity to indicate that the numbers continue indefinitely to the right. So the interval notation would be the interval from -7 to infinity. We do not want to include -7, so we would use a parenthesis, and we always use parenthesis with infinity or minus infinity. So the interval from -7 to infinity, where we use parentheses on both sides. So what is the inequality? Well, we want all the numbers that are to the right of -7, all the numbers that are larger than -7. So the inequality would be x is strictly greater than -7. We do not want to include -7, so we don't put an equal symbol on the inequality sign. What about B? Well, B, the first number that we encounter is -7. The last number that we encounter is the number -3. We have parentheses on either end, so the parentheses indicate that we want to exclude -7 and -3. -7 and -3 are not included. So the way that we write the interval notation is we put -7, comma, -3, and then we put parentheses around those two numbers. This indicates the interval from -7 to -3, not including -7 and not including -3. So how do we write this as an inequality? Well, we notice that the values of x are between -7 and -3. So the way that we would write it as an inequality is -7 is less than x, which in turn is less than -3. The values of x are in the middle, so -7 is less than x is less than -3. What about a? Well, a looks very similar to b. The only difference is the brackets at the endpoints. So what that means is that this time we want all the numbers between -7 and 3, but we also want to include -7 and -3. So the interval notation would be the interval from -7 to -3. And to indicate that we want to include -7 and -3, we would use brackets. For the inequality, x is between -7 and -3, inclusive. And to include the -7 and 3, we need to include an equal symbol with our inequality. So -7 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to -3. So what is the correct graph? Well, we see that A is the correct graph. A represents the inequality from -7, or the inequality -7 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to -3. What is the solution set? Write your answer in interval notation. Well, we already did that up above. The interval is the interval from -7 to -3, and we use brackets to indicate that the endpoints are included.